Okay, a minute past 1. Hi everyone, welcome to Economics in a Non-Western Framework. I'm Maria, I'm from Rethinking Economics Athens, and I will be hosting today. This is a session which belongs to the Diversify, Decolonize and Democratize Economics stream. We have Yorgos, who is handling all the tech today, thank you. If you have any technical questions, if you need help with Zoom, you can chat directly to him. Today we will explore economies that are structurally different to those of the typical capitalist countries, economies which are not represented in Western-centric models we currently use in economics. Mainstream economic thought stems from reflection on the economies of a few select countries in the global north. We use economics jargon born from and for the English world in places with very different economic structures. I am aware of the irony of us doing this in English, but we need a way to communicate. So we've got today Luam Kidane, we've got Doctors Georgina Gomez, Irene Sotiropoulou, and Ferda Dönmez. They will all talk about different kinds of research that they do in areas of economics and in areas of the world we don't usually hear about when studying. We will ask them to comment on each other's presentations, and at the end we will pose them your questions. You can write those in the Q&A as they come to you, and we will select them in the end and pose them to the speakers. And Luam, it's over to you. Luam, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. You can begin if you want to. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm going to start. You're frozen for me, so just let me know in the chats if you can't hear me. So, hi everyone. I'm excited to be here today. Thank you for the invitation to speak. If you've read my bio, you'll know that I'm not a trained economist. I'm an activist. I'm a student of organizing. I find joy and sustenance in how we paint and sing and write our freedom dreams. I was raised in the Eritrean struggle for liberation. I came of age while organizing protests for the right of people to move, to return, and to stay. And I continue to be led by a Pan-African anarchist and feminist theories and practices. By virtue of my politic, I have a trouble with answers, because if freedom is something we're always building, then there is no one way, no end, both things which answers require. So instead, what I'll put forward in this talk is 5 provocations on the pathway that movements building power from below are offering us to rupture the neoliberal paradigm, while also imagining and enacting economies outside of that paradigm. I hope you find that these provocations are useful. I hope that you debate them. And most importantly, I hope that you build your own revolutionary pathways. So provocation 1. As Amilcar Cabral said, people are not just fighting for ideas, they are fighting for material changes in their realities. Abekhlali, a national movement of shack dwellers in South Africa, was founded by 14 communities in 2005. The movement started as a land occupation at the Kennedy Road shack settlement in Durban, when the community was told that the land had been sold to a private buyer, when the municipality had promised that the people would have that land for public housing. Over the last 15 years, Abekhlali's 70,000 members have grown the movement for a dignified life for all through a network of land occupations. They've built the national mandate by forming and participating in community and provincial councils. Direct democracy is the heartbeat of this movement. From land occupations to protests to popular education, Abekhlali have made and continue to make the key connections between systems of governance, oppressive systems, including capitalism, histories of colonization and imperialism, corporate power, and the collusion between all of these in order to expose that African people are impoverished and dispossessed of land and basic services deliberately, while also ensuring that 70,000 people have land to live on, to build community on. Similarly, in 1984, in the shadows of a military regime, movements of rural workers across Brazil resisted displacement from their lands, increasing unemployment, widening class stratification, and the rise of industrialized agriculture. And they formed the movement of rural landless workers, or Landless Peoples Movement in Brazil, MST. Over more than 20 years, in the quest to ensure that people have land to grow food on, in the quest to protect the biodiversity of Brazil, in the quest for work that doesn't alienate labor, the Landless Peoples Movement has won 7.5 million hectares of land, built people's schools, and demonstrated what radical agrarian reform looks like in practice. As you can see from the struggles from Brazil to South Africa, they're not just about amplifying the theoretical positions in support of a rupture from the neoliberal order. The struggles have concrete forms because people need to eat. People need to be able to drink clean water. They need safe and consistent housing and so forth. MST and Abakhlali are showing us the importance of fortifying the practices of liberation, which then leads me to provocation 2, that the commodification is an action. To make this point, let's first stop in South Korea, where in May of 1980, during the Gwangju uprising, in mid-May, people had taken to the streets to protest, among other things, authoritarian rule. They wanted to call for an end to martial law and to fight for labor rights. In response to these protests, the governments imposed martial law across all of South Korea, and the military was brought in to disperse the protesters. Fighting back, the people of Gwangju managed to drive the military out and create a liberated zone that they were able to hold for 6 days. In those 6 days, there were daily people's assemblies that thousands of people joined. Healthcare practitioners provided medical treatment to anyone who needed it. People built and provided shelter for each other, and others cooked food. Taxis and buses were used to transport people when they needed to move. The functioning of the city for those 6 days were in the hands of the people. And in those 6 days, the ability to buy and sell something was not what determined your access to any services or goods. Now, traveling back a few decades and landing in the United States, I also want to lift up the work of the Black Panther Party survival programs. Starting from its founding in 1966, the Black Panther Party instituted a network of programs aimed at providing for the needs of the people. They formed 13 medical clinics where people could get medical treatment for free. They ran breakfast programs for students and free food programs for the community. You could get clothes, transportation, and childcare, among many other programs, all which were organized by the party. So life in Gwangju and in the communities that the Black Panther Party was able to operate in was decommodified, even if only in moments or for days, because the farmer and the taxi driver and the doctor and the cook and the tailor and the plumber and the teacher decided that the services and goods that they knew how to grow or make or give were going to be shared and given because someone simply needed it or wanted it. Imagine if each of us made that choice and actioned it. It would mean that a critical tenet of the capitalist economy, alienated labor, would be upended. Over the last 3 months, what the public ideas from the left, like moratoriums on individual debt and rent payments and seizures of private property for public housing being instituted is a big opportunity. Namely, what this allows us to concretely show in a different way than we've been able to before, and what I'm offering as provocation 3, is that a set of decisions is what an economy is. And should we decide to make a different set of decisions, we can build different economic lives. So take, for instance, the compounding supply and distribution issues we're seeing on a global scale. If we're able to seize the means of production and create more localized distribution channels, this will help us create a further crack in the neoliberal facade, while also building and facilitating autonomous structures that don't rely on capitalist value chains. The factories and the farms exist because of our labor, our skills, and our knowledges. This is our power. And again, just as in the first 2 provocations, there are examples we can draw on to concretize this point. Once the borders in South Africa closed and a lockdown was put in place, what we saw, and not just in South Africa, but across the global South, is that governments allowed businesses deemed essential to stay open. Unsurprisingly, most of those allowed to keep their businesses open were corporations, while those who worked in the popular economy, like markets, for example, were deemed non-essential. What this meant is that the structural inequality present before COVID-19 took an even deeper foothold. In response, the C19 Huatheng Food Sovereignty Working Group, part of the broader C19 People's Coalition, connected smallholder farmers with surplus produce to people in urban centers by creating a localized supply and distribution system run for and by the people, bypassing state institutions and corporations. Another example is the worker-recovered enterprise movement in Argentina that started in the late 1990s. After years of neoliberal measures that prioritized privatization and caused deepened unemployment in the midst of large-scale protests and an economic collapse, workers who were out of jobs because factories were being closed or abandoned took over their workplaces. Driven by principles and practices of horizontal management and ownership by workers, a new wave of economic practices rippled through Argentina as workers took over factories, hotels, and schools. The occupation of these workplaces came with a steep learning curve around administration and the management of production and distribution, and was not without its complications and contradictions, both ideological and practical. But what feels important to emphasize here is that workers took their power with a desire to begin enacting a different economic orientation, one that roots itself in collectivity, in cooperation, in the well-being of the workers and the community. So just like any other social construct, capitalism is created and reinforced by people, by ideas and institutions. What social movements are doing every day is building a power from below to counter those ideas and the practices of the neoliberal empire. This is true of activists, of scholars and movements theorizing and calling for specific and immediate economic action, but it's also true of movements, activists, and scholars whose focus is not explicitly tied to economics, but whose work nonetheless still disrupts the logarithms which capitalism depends on to continue, and also yields processes which are critical to actualizing new economies. This then is my fourth provocation. Everywhere you see there are borders, know they are imagined, or in other words, new economies are not just for economists. In 2020, we've heard the wave of calls from Black communities in the United States for abolition, a world where we engage each other without coercive, carceral, and punitive systems. And these calls have gotten louder. Organizers from the Movement for Black Lives have built a movement platform that, and I quote, rejects the funding of practices, policies, or personnel that create danger for Black people and deprive our communities of what the privileged have long enjoyed in this country: basic rights, safety, and freedom. Through participatory governance and budgeting processes that engage and invest in underserved communities, we can then work together to design a future that does not rely on police and punishment, end quote. This call then for non-coercive, non-punitive measures for accountability directly attacks the centralization of power and monopoly of violence that is capitalism's lifeline. Through proposing different visions for transformative justice in our communities, movements fighting for Black life are also part of building new economies, because we can't have a new economy or new economies while also still relying on structures like the police and military, whose reason for being is to defend imperial and colonial interests. This then brings me to the fifth and also the last provocation, that cultural production is a blueprint, not just an aesthetic practice. As I mentioned earlier, part of my political formation is due to the struggle for liberation fought by the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, or the EPLF. It is also here that I first understood that cultural production can be used to build collective visions of freedom and to conduct popular and political education. My mother would tell me how the EPLF, for instance, would take well-known stories and stage theatrical plays in which the main storyline would be amended to include revolutionary characters fighting for self-determination. There are also other examples we can draw on of how cultural production has been used by movements as a site for popular education and dialogue, from historical ones like the PAIGC's Liberation Radio in Guinea-Bissau and Cabo Verde, to the ANC's Radio Freedom, to the artwork of the Organization of Solidarity with the People of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, to more recent examples of the protests, the songs, the murals, and the writing that came out of the revolutionary struggles in Sudan and Chile. What these examples show us is that the counter-hegemonic cultural production can nurture the possibilities of freedom by acting as a site from which dialogue, collective imagining, and the incubation and experimentation of freedom practices can take root. I know I'm almost out of time, so I'll end by saying that It's time to break the colonial hegemony of economics. And as we can see, people's movements have been and continue to do that in practice. Let's learn from them, let's carry them forward, and take what works with us while continuing to create and to build. Thank you.
Thank you, Luam. I will now invite Georgina to speak, if she can hear us.
Yes, give me a second to start the video. That's it. Okay, that's a very interesting provocations. Maybe I should take up the method from Luam. My name is Georgina Gomez, as you know, and I will speak of a very different matter, that's money. And well, we were all trained to believe that every economy has money. And actually my main area of research was on the monies of Argentina. And here I speak of monies in plural, which sounds a little bit like a breach of the 10 main commandments of every economist. I think most economists all over the world have been trained to believe that every country should have one money because anything else would be unmanageable. And okay, so I would like to unpack a number of things on this statement. So the first one is every economy needs money. The second statement that I would like to debate is the fact that every country should have one money and only one money and not more. And the third one is, where does this come from? I mean, this panel is about trying to rethink where these key statements of economics come from. I don't know, I know the title of the panel is the non-Western economies, but I would actually, I have to ask, I have to wonder if this works anywhere, Western or non-Western alike, or if it's a world of fantasy invented by some economists. But anyway, let me start with these 3 points. That's what I'm going to talk about now. So the first one is whether there should be one type of money or more per country. And the reason why I would like to refer to the case of Argentina is because, well, in the previous crisis that started in '95 onwards, it was first civil society groups that started trading with their own type of money. There was never any barter. They took up the name of barter club, but there was never, or I mean, there was barter for only a couple of weeks. So this is negligible. Very soon they went on to have their own types of money, grassroots type of money in very small groups in the beginning. Afterwards, they expanded and there was a very large variety of modalities in which you would have very local groups trading their own self-produced things. Sometimes they were not produced, they were things that had at home and that the capitalist economy would have considered them waste. So they started rethinking what is waste and what is second-hand products that can be reused. Some of them started trading with each other, building networks. Some of these networks kept on expanding until they covered the whole country. So, well, in the end, at the peak of I mean, this was triggered by the crisis. And as the crisis first improved, but then it became much, much worse. Argentina is one of the countries that around 2000, 2001, 25% of the GDP was chopped off within a couple of years. It's one of the only examples in which you see such a huge economic demise in times of peace. So in this period, this network of people trading with their own types of currencies and monies, estimations are horrible. So these numbers are as good as any or as good as none. But estimations are that about 6 million people were trading their own self-produced things. And as I said, sometimes it was second-hand things, things considered waste. So when I say self-produced, this is again not totally correct, but anyway. About 6 million people were trading with their own non-official, non-state kind of currency. Now, this in itself is fantastic because it was a boom of the civil society of people saying, well, we can do this, we can do that, we can also make money, sure. So in itself, without necessarily having this debate, this explicit debate, they realized that they were taking over something that most economists in the world, as I said, are trained to think that money is something that can only come from the state. But it didn't stop there. Now, because of its inflationary past and so on, we see that the history of Argentinians and their money is quite conflictive. And there have been parallel currencies from the state since the 60s. At some point, also one of the provinces, the smallest provinces in Argentina, started having its own provincial currency. So this is state, but only limited to the territory of this province, which is the second level of the second tier of government. Well, during this crisis, several other provinces said, we have this huge budget deficit. So they started also covering these deficits with their own provincial type. Well, they were debt bonds, but they were allowed to circulate. So in 13 of the 22 Argentine provinces at that time were having also their own currencies. So this is a hybrid between what the issue was done indeed by state or provincial states, but the ones that actually worked also were backed and had the collaboration of the private sector in these provinces, because it was either this or nothing. You can imagine that in the middle of this terrible economic crisis, this economic demise, for many local shops and enterprises, this kind of local currencies were, well, an excellent way of reactivating or at least surviving through this terrible economic crisis. So I spoke, of course, there was this state money, the central state, the central bank's money, which is pesos in Argentina. Then you had the provinces, and I said some of them worked very well for reactivation purposes and for allowing people to survive through this horrible crisis. Others did not work so well, but the ones that worked actually did have this network, this collaboration or partnerships with the private sector. Then at the third level, as I said, you had civil society groups, some of them very local, some of them nationwide, or at least exchanging things with each other throughout the entire country. So I'm speaking of at least 3 different types of money. And I am already violating one of the commandments of the economy that says in order to manage monetary economy and money and finances, you should have only one type of currency. Well, as a matter of fact, for the needs of local people across countries which are very big and where the state does not have such a strong and established presence, this worked much better. And I have seen in the last weeks quite a few, I've been receiving emails from lots of different places, from Colombia to India to Peru, saying, well, so how can we start these complementary currencies in my group of fishermen and women, and in my this or that, very remote areas that with this COVID crisis are also suffering from not being able to keep up their economic activity as they are used to, as they need to for their own livelihood and survival. So this is something that I think for a crisis, it is extremely important that we think and we rethink how to manage our money, and how communities and states, well, provincial or whatever they are called in various countries, lower levels of government, can also have and can also issue their own money, can claim back from central governments and central banks the rights to have their own money. Now, when I suggest this, the first reaction I guess from most mainstream economists trained in the Western tradition is, oh, but you cannot have that. You run the risk of losing control over money. That cannot be. And then we go into, well, but how, where is this theory? How come we know and we are so sure that there can only be one type of money. And then in this debate, we go back to this famous Gresham Law that if you have more than one type of money, the different types of money would compete with each other, and the good one would be stored, and then eventually regular economic activity would be carried through with this bad money. So good money drives out everything else. Okay, so eventually the economic activity dries out because there is no money. So good. So what is this Gresham Law? And I did some research a couple of years ago. And actually this Gresham person was a banker. He was not an economist. He was just a banker, a trader, a representative of Queen Elizabeth 500 years ago in Antwerp. And he sent a letter saying to Queen Elizabeth, saying, "My dear Majesty, I have found out, I have observed in the real world that when there are different types of coins, we have to think, as I said, 500 years ago, people tend to keep the best ones, the safest money. And then what we see around is the bad money, whatever that is. And this will conspire against the exchange rates, blah, blah, blah." Now, this person, Gresham, in his exchange of letters with Queen Elizabeth was clearly a very clever woman because she understood all these economic theories only through letters. And well, she answered, "Yes, Mr. Gresham, blah, blah, blah." And this is the basis on which we speak about this Gresham Law. I have no idea why we think this is a law, but definitely it was never written as such. It was just, as I said, an exchange of letters. And this is one of the key foundations of why we think that there can only be one type of money per country, because if there are more than one, as I said, all the others that are not the best one would eventually be driven out, would be devaluated, depreciated, etc., and so on. So then we have to question, come on, is this it? Is this why we really think as economists that there has to be only one money per country? When at the same time, I can show that in a country like Argentina, and I said, I do not want to undermine the fact that many of these currencies did not end well. Most of them actually did not end well, but then that's a different question. We can always ask ourselves, how can we make a multiple currency system work and not discard them just because this Mr. Gresham person said 500 years ago, "I have observed that good money drives out bad money." So I would like to end there saying, well, perhaps we need to rethink whether in these extremely critical moments for the economy, we should not open up our minds and consider the possibility that for the needs of different people and different communities in different situations, it is actually better to have more than one type of money in a country and not just one. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgina. So now we've got Irene and Ferda, who will, I guess, be speaking together. So you can decide who's going to go first.
Hello, I think I'm going to speak first, right, Irene? Okay, hello everyone. I would like to thank the organizers for giving us this chance to come together and, open new ways for thinking economics and get rid of this black box of economics so that we can live better lives. I would like to talk about what we do together with Irene, say for the last couple of years. Actually, we have been corresponding on the idea for like 9 years for now, if I'm not mistaken. We have been thinking about what we can do in terms of seeking and gathering and producing people's knowledge about economics. This drove us to the idea of grassroots economics. We decided to look outside the academia, to look the activities of ordinary people and observe what they do and think about it in terms of whether it is how could I say, it is explained by the mainstream or other economic theories, or are they different from what we have been taught at the universities and what we have been teaching to our students in the universities. So we decided to do inquiry on the economic knowledge created outside and disseminated outside the academia, and not by people who have official training in economics. We would like to look what other people are doing and practicing in terms of economic activities. So we wanted to create economic knowledge that is useful for the society that is used by, rather than trying to apply onto them economic theories created by somewhere else in the world, created by some other group of people who are not representatives of everybody. So from the beginning, we thought that, well, this economic theory is created in a highly competitive environment where the environment is dominated by white, male, Western European or North American people. So we have to look what other people are doing in order to understand how people are surviving under this conditions of, say, climate change, economic crisis, all sort of problems that are created by the economic system that we live in. So, but of course, the theoretical quest that we are willing to do will make use of findings of the earlier researches and earlier findings of previous researches and published or unpublished data or print or oral or online publications. So what we wanted to do is to come up with an original way of doing and thinking in economics. That's why we come together and write down a proposal, which is awarded by a Newton Mobility Grant by the British Academy, and that gave us a chance to work with people, to work with ordinary people who has the knowledge of economics, irrespective of whether they have an economic education or not. Actually, it is better if you don't have an economics education. That gives you a freer mind. So Luam, you are much more advantageous in that sense, because once you have this economic education, you start to think of in that, straight lines, and it kinds of disables you thinking in your original historical, cultural, social, political point of view. That's an important aspect. So we look grassroots sources where this wild male middle class supremacy is challenged, defied, or subverted, because we don't accept that either peasant class or working class people are ignorant, backward thinking, and prone to destroy the environment. We think quite the contrary. We think that those people are producing and consuming for millions of years, say before the capitalist mode of production, and they were quite happy. They were in harmony with the environment, and we didn't have that much problems concerning the climate, environment, all sort of problems that is created by the ongoing modes of production. So we consider people, any ordinary people, social movements and communities, especially outside academia, as equally important creators and disseminators of economic knowledge. So it's not under the hegemony of Western white male middle class economists to produce economic knowledge. So for this purpose, we wanted to do a transdisciplinary research. And we basically, for the time being, for this medium-term research, we focused geographically on Turkey, Greece, and UK experiences of grassroots economic movements. And we organized 2 workshops, one in Hull and one in Ankara. And we have many people, like around 50 in Ankara, for example, attending the workshop. Most people are from food collectives, cooperatives, independent researchers, and students, and sort of people participated and exchanged their ideas on how we learn economics, how we disseminate economic knowledge. I mean, ordinary people, not academic people, and how we produce economic knowledge. And we came across very, very interesting cases that, for example, I have never think of when I was being taught economics. We had storytellers, for example. Storytellers were telling us how the dissemination of economic knowledge is made through storytelling from this generation to the other generation. I'm sure Irene might talk about it much more in more detail than me. So this is our approach, and this approach entails a major component of self-education. So we use every sort of methods. We use firstly languages, as Maria pointed out at the beginning of the session. It's a pity that we cannot speak our own languages, which, you know, speaking English limits my explaining capacity. But still, yeah, we have to come up with a way to communicate with each other. But for our research, we concentrated on each other's languages. Say I concentrated on Turkish language, how the language can be used, and was used as a tool to disseminate economic knowledge between the generations, for example. And we use all sorts of case studies and other forms of tools that can be used for producing economic knowledge. So how do we conduct this research? Use our language skills and all our previous research. For example, before starting thinking and researching on grassroots economics, I'm a development economist. I'm teaching development economics and macroeconomics in Ankara University. But you know, even though it's kind of, you know, a Western dominated knowledge, I can still use my own background on, say, a female from Ankara, from a lower class family. I can combine that knowledge with now my being aware of that economics is produced outside academia. I can use all that knowledge to proceed and come up with the real people's knowledge about economic theory. So what we do, use our activist and cultural experience to explore this research topic, create learning tools that are, this is very important, especially for the people who are doing their living, earning their living in teaching universities. So I don't want to teach this stuff that I don't believe and I don't want to teach. So I have to come up with new learning tools to disseminate to students and to my colleagues, to other colleagues, of how we can learn about people's economics. So we have to contribute as the grassroots economics researchers. We have to contribute to the more socially aware approaches in economics that are socially, critically, environmentally, politically sustainable. And this is what we do for the time being. So let me stop here and give the word to Irene to maybe give more detail about what we do in our research. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, after the other three speakers, I feel that I don't have much to say. First, Luam, thank you so much. What you do is what we do. I mean, we thank you for being here and thank you for presenting your provocations. These provocations is what we want to do with economics and what we want to do with the economy. Actually, if you ask Ferda and I, we're not very happy with the economic system as it is. And personally, I really don't like capitalism. I want it to end. And I really don't like patriarchy. And with Ferda, we work a lot on patriarchal economic structures because patriarchy is also an economic system, not only a social one. And we also want to smash patriarchy, not only capitalism. So one thing that we do through this research approach is to see how people were and are resisting economic exploitation against patriarchy, against heteronormative ways of structuring the economy at the expense of people who don't fit the heteronormative patriarchal perceptions. And we also want to see how people resist capitalism, but also other exploitative systems. So we are very aware that a non-capitalist system can also be exploitative. It can be, let's say, a slavery-based system, just like we had, you know, in ancient Greece, for example. So we would not like to go back to that. The second thing is that we don't really, we're not searching for a universal theory that would fit every community on the planet. We acknowledge that we have our own experiences and limitations of experiences, so we cannot substitute people who have experiences in a different economy than the ones we live in. So we don't want to replicate the mistake of Western European, you know, or North American economists that in case they devise a theory that could be good, let's say, could be good for the economy they know very well, we don't want to say that what we have found in our economies, in our experiences, that this is valid in an economy where we don't know, about which we don't know many things about, where we have not lived at all. So in terms of what we produce, this is very, let's say, very geographically and culturally delimited, and we're very happy about that. We are also very happy in case, you know, other people do similar things. We're also very happy to see what they find in other economies, and it isn't, they're not supposed to find similar things that to those that we are finding. Georgina, thank you so much. Well, the work that has been done in the South America, in Abya Yala, concerning economic theory and practice through social movements and scholarship is amazing. Anyone who wants to work on non-Western economic structures and has a possibility to learn Spanish, please learn, because there is so much literature and research and theory and practice, and it is available online. Because it is not a coincidence, because this was a major resistance to colonialism, and the theory that is produced, whether by scholars or by social movements, is really helping everyone to be a better person concerning how to know the economy. So really, I grew up as an economist in this sector, in this subfield of heterodox finance, and I think that I owe this approach of grassroots economics, or bacılar, as we call it in Turkish, that means sisters from the same mother, to the work that is being done by heterodox finance experts, scholars, and activists. We don't distinguish, you know, formal experts or informal experts. Someone who is an activist is very well respected because they are producing the knowledge, possibly more than academics. And the final thing is that we are, with Ferda, we're working on this since October 2010, so it is 10 years now. And we are using several sources. The folk tales and storytelling is the easiest part because the stories have a lot of information. There is a lot of information in other types of art. Social movements are doing great work through internet, so we are using all available sources. And what the problem we have is that even radical and critical theory that has been created in a Western setting, it might be good for that Western setting, but it cannot help us in our societies. For example, the monetary theory, just like Georgina explained, has been created in certain countries by certain people. So Elizabeth I made sure to dump into Europe golden and silver coins. And she managed to transfer the monetary problem she had in her kingdom to the other European states. So she knew very well what she was doing. But that means also that many theories have been constructed through this colonial, through this, let's say, interstate fight about power and colonies. And we have to be aware of that. So what we do is to see how people themselves, I mean, I use the same approach in the research I'm doing in Hull University about farmers markets. And I find that even if they don't use another type of currency, the official currency they use is used in a completely different way. And this is amazing. This shows that local communities, even in the UK, the cradle of capitalism, they have another knowledge about the economy than the one we learn in universities and economics departments. So this is what I wanted to say, and we will be happy to receive questions and comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So if you have a comment on someone else's presentation, you can just go ahead and unmute yourself and say your comment.
I would like to comment on that last point, because I said at some point, I don't know, actually I know the answer to my question, but anyway, I was going to say, I sometimes wonder whether mainstream economic theories work anywhere, Western or non-Western economies. So I know the panel is focused on non-Western economies, but I sometimes, when I read mainstream economics, I feel like it comes from a planet I've never been to. So perhaps we should start thinking on whether that kind of economic science is, you know, if it's applicable anywhere, Western or non-Western economies. Of course, there is this issue of power, and you might always say, well, this is the reason why we are actually using this theory, because it favors certain people in certain countries. I would not, you know, be able to debate this, but does it favor all people in any country, and in Western or non-Western? And as I said, I would like to pose the question, but of course, I think I know the answer to my own question. But in any case, thanks for that.
Thank you, Georgina. I completely agree with your comment. Yeah, I was wondering what have I done to choose that department? I don't understand. When I was a first year student in the economics department, what is this utility thing? You know, what all these abstract tools which are told to be useful to understand a reality turned out that they never explain anything to anybody. But to me, I think those theories are useful only for those who produce them and who disseminate them, who make money out of them. And but criticizing is not enough. We have to come up with this, total rejection and alternative economic knowledge. Not maybe we might not call it theory, but accumulation of economic knowledge of different societies at different points, at different historical point in time, and then maybe we will get rid of this black box economics. I will. This is the first comment. I would like to thank all speakers for their presentations. I would like to ask or tell Luam that I would like to hear a bit more about this commodification in action thing. You know, what sort of stuff take place actually in the region. And to Georgina, actually, we have never, to my knowledge, we have never observed these parallel currency type of organizations, groupings in Turkey. I was wondering what type of practical problems are arising when you have such schemes. What type of practical, daily problems in using them? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ferda. I also have some questions, but I can maybe quickly respond to your question around the decommodification piece. I think it actually happens around us all the time. And the reason that I particularly highlighted that it's an action and not just a theory is because oftentimes when we're talking about it, we get lost in the, well, what if, and then all of the theoretical analysis stops us from acting. And the point in all of the examples that I gave is that there aren't any perfect examples. There are always things that are being refined, that are being changed, and it's in the doing that we learn that. And so both the theory is important, but so is the action. And so, I feel like an example that's happening recently is in terms of education. You're seeing across the US, across the continent, in terms of where Black communities across Latin America who are talking about abolition. There's some people that have an understanding of what that is and others who don't. And we're not relying on formalized educational institutions to teach each other and to learn from each other. We're just doing it. We're setting up meetings, we're setting up study groups, we're setting up conversations with people, with our communities. That's an action that's decommodifying education. There's also examples from the food sovereignty movement in terms of how we share and save seed. In the industrialized agriculture model, seed has become a commodified entity that is owned by 3 or 4 seed companies, the majority of the seed that's sold. The reason that seed sovereignty and saving seed in exchange between small scale farmers is such a challenge to the capitalist system, but also industrialized agriculture, which is why there's so many treaties that are trying to regulate patenting and saying that, you have to have a particular regulatory framework before you can safely share seed. It has nothing to do about safety. It's that if people are sharing seed and saving seed, then the capitalists can't make money off of that process. And so there's plenty of different examples. Those are just 2 I can give you. And when you consider that 80% of the world is fed by small scale farmers, that decommodification is an action is actually in practice more than it's not in practice. And so I think it also picks up on the point that Georgina was making in terms of who does the Western frame neoliberal economy actually work for? And it works for a very few and very small amount of people. But this is where I think feminist movements really help us think through it, because oftentimes we're talking about economics as if, again, it's a theoretical force, the market is neutral, but it's an analysis of power. And this is what feminist movements remind us all of the time. The reason that the few are able to continue to move forward a set of systems that doesn't work for the majority of the world is because they have held on to power through the monopoly of violence, through state institutions, through democracy practices that actually give us a false choice. And that's the importance of the building power from below that I was talking about. There's so many lessons in that there's no one way. There's a multitude of worlds, like the Zapatistas say. It's a world where many worlds exist. And so in part, that's also why I was giving examples of sparks that we can pick up on, because if we can network and build a constellation of the movements that are doing these things differently, then we can also continue to build that power. So that, I hope, answers your question. The other thing I wanted to ask is both for you, Ferda and Irene, your research is really interesting, and I'm always curious in that work that you're doing in breaking out of the kind of structures and molds that you've been taught are economics. How has that shifted your own internal practice? What are some of the things you've learned that have surprised you? I'm always curious from a personal standpoint, the way that it also shifts your own self.
Hi, Maria. How do we proceed? Should we answer questions? I can answer, I don't know, Ferda or Georgina, I can answer the question, or I can wait for my turn. So Maria, it's up to you to decide.
Honestly, it's just for speakers, so feel free. If you have an answer, then go ahead.
Well, Luam, for me, it has changed everything. It has become very difficult, of course, because as one of the questions ask about, it's not easy to publish if you say, you know, and it's not now that we say that people are talking about decolonizing the discipline. We have been saying this for 10 years now, so we were very amazed. We have been rejected, you know, even from conferences. I mean, you send an abstract and we receive a very nice rejection after it. And you have to get accustomed to that. But for me, it has opened a new way of viewing not only the economy and let's say my research, but also viewing the resistances around. With Ferda, we have realized that nation states, especially the nation states in, let's say, in the Mediterranean, they cut our histories in pieces. So we don't know really the whole trajectory of women's history in Greece and Turkey, for example. So we don't know how women were resisting. We don't know how they were taking part in the economy. We don't know how poor people were resisting capitalism or the empires that were in the region. And it has given me a lot of hope and a lot of, I mean, in terms of career, it might not work as it is, but I think it gave me a lot of hope concerning how powerful social movements and can be if they want to, especially if they take into account their own experiences. So, and it also made me think that the limitations of the knowledge, like I can see a lot of things, but I am also missing things. So I'm always open, you know, to comments and feedback and critique, because it taught me how limited the knowledge can be and how scholarship can exist while recognizing those limits. So this is what it was for me. It was fascinating. It is still fascinating. I hope I will continue for the decades to come, if it's possible. But it created this framework, this approach. Let's say in academia it's called research program, but I would say a way of relating to the collective.
Are you done, Irene? Okay. Thank you for the question, Luam. Well, together with everything what Irene said, well, to me, I think it's kind of gave me an independence from the strict thinking of academic life. I start giving less value for, for example, getting published. I'm not that eager to publish anymore. I'm just after this knowledge, and irrespective of whether people from academia like it or not, people are producing this knowledge, and it's good to feel that, I'm aware of it. So kind of now academia is more like a workplace for me. I'm just a laborer earning my money there, but it's not the only place to produce knowledge. It's good to know this now. It gives me more freedom. And other than that, I also started to look people in a, how could I say, different way. I was thinking that, okay, I got my PhD, now I'm the teacher, I will teach everybody, what is economics is about. It is gone now. This stupid idea is gone now. I'm taking everyone as the teacher of producing, as the teachers. Everybody can teach me on things that are related with economics, production, distribution, all sort of stuff. So I think, yeah, this is kind of more economics now, producing economic knowledge now becomes a daily life, fun, and not dismal activity for me. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I still think somehow that we still need to be able to communicate with the others. So, I mean, creating a community of the converted, no, as it is sometimes defined, I think that doesn't help. So I think it is really important to find ways of communicating with those that obviously will not think that it's useful to decolonize and criticize and create alternatives to this production of knowledge. But this is one point. I would also like to answer well, there is a question on, well, what are the difficulties or the challenges in the production of local types of money at the various levels? I would like to say, well, there are so many, because basically this depends on collective action. And there are some typical problems of collective action. Who does what? Who organizes? Is there other leaders? Or how do we manage? So this is one set of problems. The others are very practical issues. Where do we start? What is the name of the currency? How much? Etc. In my own opinion, researching these currencies in various countries, a key challenge is what is the scale at which you pitch? Because if it is too big, indeed, this is very difficult to manage without clear hierarchical structures. So it has to be not so big that it becomes unmanageable, that people don't know each other, well, creation of trust, etc. But at the same time, if it's just a very small number of people, there won't be enough economic impact to be interesting in terms of livelihood. So it will be nice to meet other people, but when we talk about currency, it should have it should facilitate people's livelihoods and improve their lives, their welfares, etc. So if it is too small, and this is what we see, especially in some of these schemes in Europe, is that it's a group of people offering, well, a natural product and tarot, fortune telling, and so on. It becomes so small that this doesn't really have an impact of what am I going to eat tomorrow. Yeah. So these are challenges, and actually it's very difficult to find the proper scale that would be, on the one hand, that it would have, as I said, that it would facilitate people's lives and people's livelihoods and welfare and satisfaction of material needs, that at the same time we would have this social, the creation of sociality, no? the networks, the getting to know each other, the building of a community, and then the questioning of what is our economy, in fact, what is our economic activity, what are we, to what extent are we supposed to create, to feed ourselves and have a decent life? What is decent as a life in terms of, well, as I say, economy and so on? And what is simply irrational? Giving gifts is completely irrational. I mean, I'm using 1.5 hours now of my holidays. This is irrational. Yeah, but I do it because I want to. So we need this to combine these different frames to be able to understand. And I agree that there is no perfect example, no super best practice that we can copy everywhere. But at the same time, there needs to be a common language, and this is a belief. I have no way of actually saying why this has to be, but I think there has to, we should be able to create a common language by which we can learn from each other and refine knowledges and contextualize and so on. But what we contextualize, well, it has to be told and communicated in such a way that it looks like others can also benefit. So in the world of complementary currencies, there are thousands and thousands of typical of different schemes, sorry. But at the same time, you do find some common challenges. And I think a good place to start, if you want to start a community in your own, a community currency in your own community, is to say, well, what has happened to the others? What other learning has been produced before I start? In Turkey, they are completely forbidden. Actually, I mean, the answer to that question is very simple. The government has made sure that no such things could ever happen, at least with the current government in Turkey. But they do exist in Greece, so you don't have to go so far away to find them. Your neighbor has them.
Thank you so much.
I could maybe just say one quick thing, Maria, and then
yes.
move into other questions. Thank you for that, Georgina. I hear you on a lot of the different points that you brought up, and that there's something important about not only speaking to the converted. And having said that, I also do think that we over-prioritize people who we think have power and feel like we need to convince them otherwise. And I think what the African struggles for liberation, both on the continent and in the diaspora, have showed us is that we can appeal to the humanity of white supremacy every day, and that actually doesn't shift. What shifts is that we build power from below, and then that shift gets forced. And so for me, that's the reason why the focus on building for power from below is not just because I don't have a desire to have other people access it, but it's where I put my energy, and also where I understand in terms of systemic and tactical organizing decisions, who it is that is going to build that power from below. And that there's billions of people that are more in that camp than there is the few thousand that aren't. And so for that reason, I think it's a question of tactics and a question of organizing strategy. And I think, there's people who, and I think in your role, for instance, you're well placed to be having those types of conversations. But I wanted to highlight that I think it's also a question of where we're putting our energies. And at a certain point, I think we have to let go of this notion that we're going to convince those who are benefiting from a system to let go of it because they've somehow come to some kind of consciousness. We know that's not the case, which is why, you know, the people's movement has been so important. And we have examples of that, like I've said. Additionally, I think the one thing that we haven't really come up on in this conversation is the idea of currency. And so, yes, there's multiple currencies and there's ways that we can engage that and what that's meant. But there's also something below that that's fundamental, is that, is there a need for an idea like currency? Does something have to be commodified in order to be exchanged? And this is what the Cuban revolutionary struggle between 1959 and 63 was really trying to grapple with, in terms of what does central planning look like? And they took more of a statist perspective. I'm more of an anarchist, so I don't think we need to go through a centralized thing like the state. But we have the example, for instance, in Mexico of the Moneyless Exchange. And the idea in terms of the Moneyless Exchange is just very simple. It's a non-hierarchical economic system. Everything has the same value, and people are exchanging based on what it is that they need and what they're able to give. And so one of the questions I saw in the Q&A was, well, how does that work if we had limited supply but a lot more demand? And that also implicates, and this is why I'm saying that it's a holistic practice in terms of how we're shifting the ways we relate to each other through economics, but also politically, socially, and culturally. It, of course, then means that we have to shift what it is that we're demanding and our expectation of what it is that we're going to have. So we can't maintain the same ways of interacting with each other under a capitalist system and then try to build something different. We have to shift it holistically. So just that as a comment.
Thank you, everyone. So I will ask some of the questions from the chat. And I think this is mostly for the economists here. So someone was asking, what do you mean exactly by non-mainstream economic thought in your specific line of work? Because sometimes people will say mainstream and non-mainstream and will mean different things. And I would like to connect that with another question on whether you think that traditional frameworks like neoclassical economics or Marxism are still relevant nowadays, especially considering how they were created in Western societies, and are they still applicable to non-Western ones? Whoever wants to go first. Irene, yes, go ahead.
Actually, I couldn't quite hear the questions. The picture was freezing. Please.
Okay, so the question is, what do you mean with non-mainstream economics in your specific work? And if we think that theories like Marxism and neoclassical economics are still relevant today and applicable to non-Western countries.
Okay, thank you. You go first, Irene.
Okay. Well, let's start from what's happening right now in the economics departments. Most economics departments in the world are teaching neoliberal economics. The best they can do is when they're going to the monetary theory to add something like a bit of post-Keynesianism, monetary theory, just to not to seem completely, you know, out of context when teaching to the students. So this is the mainstream. Post-Keynesianism is not considered to be mainstream, though. It has been one of the critical schools that have emerged last decades. And so in case we are talking formally, what's mainstream and what's accepted as what you have to know in order to take a qualification in economics. And non-mainstream is everything else, whether it is Straffian economics or Marxist economics or feminist economics. So everything else is non-mainstream. So we have the neoliberal theory and the rest. And in the bachelor project, in the project of the sisters from the same mother, we understand, we cherish the work of all economists, even if we disagree, And it is good because sometimes it is good to see how, how a certain class or social group tries to explain the economy, how they perceive it. So everything is relevant if your class, gender, or skin color fits the theory. So in case you are a factory owner, white American like Milton Friedman, his monetarist theories are still relevant to you and you would be very happy about them. They're still applied, especially in Europe lately, and they have created a lot of pain and a lot of, let's say, they have undermined democracies all over the world, like in Latin America or Africa. And in case you take profit out of them, they're still relevant to you. This is why they're still taught in many universities. So from my point of view, what is relevant is what people say about well-being and welfare, people's welfare. So in case it doesn't help people's welfare, for me, it's not economically relevant. I don't want to research monetarism, for example. I don't want to teach it. I don't want to present it as a valid way of running the economy because it doesn't help most of the people. So I totally agree with Georgina and the other speakers that the system we have, capitalism, does not help anyone. And Marxism, well, Ferda, well, I'm not a Marxist. Ferda is. I'm not a Marxist, but I still use historical materialist methods, like understanding economic relationships within their historical context and material historical context. So what Luam says that capitalism and commodification is very material is what is important to understand how people are deprived of their livelihoods, their food, their families. And this is very material. It is not an ideology if you have people living in poverty. So this is my reply to the question.
Thank you. Maybe I can add a few more sentences on top of what Irene says. As a feminist Marxist academic, well, by mainstream, I always mean neoclassical economics. As Irene said, the neoliberal version of neoclassical economics. And you were, Irene, you were quite optimist, actually, say in Turkish universities. Not even post-Keynesian theories are being taught. It is quite the contrary. Just the neoclassical, neoliberal, I don't want to say the bad word, theory, say, neoclassical theory. So this is what I mean by mainstream. And for Marxism, well, as also Irene said, we can use the method and extend it, because the Marxist theory, Marx talks about capital and talks about the production area, but we have to think about the reproduction area as well. We have to think about the environment as well. So we can use the method, but extend it to give us clues about the other spheres, other spheres than the capital itself. So yes, we can use non-mainstream theories in seeking the reality, and Marxist theory is one of those tools to me. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I think Irene has said. I'm also, when I say mainstream, I'm also thinking about neoclassical, and I think Irene has said it. I could not improve on that, but I would just like to give an example for money. If you open any textbook of economics, what is money? Well, money is a thing. We don't know which thing, but it's this thing that does 4 or 3 functions, depending on the authors. And that is reserve of value, the standard, that is unit of account, and means of payment. So money is this X thing that, as I said, we don't know what it is, that performs these three functions. And there is a fourth one, according to some authors, that's means of settlement of debts, etc. But let me refer to these three things. First of all, this neoclassical theory does not explain whether this thing is beans, coins, bits in a computer system. What is this thing that performs these three functions? So, and the second thing is these three functions. Why we are trained within mainstream economics to think that these three functions have to be performed by this one thing. But reserve of value, to what extent is this relevant? Is this function key, extremely fundamental function of money, reserve of value, when poor people do not save in money? Yeah, and if you are really poor, one of the first things that you would learn is, I'm thinking of a poor woman in a slum. She will never save in money because your husband, thieves, anyone can take it. So you would buy things, you would have a, I don't know, a goat, whatever, but you would not save in money. So the function of reserve of value, of this mainstream definition of money, doesn't help you. On the contrary. Well, unit of account, of course, is what we count things in. That one is probably the most basic one. But then means of payment, and you can have, I babysit your children for 1 hour, and you will help me do laundry for 1 hour. And then, in fact, what is the notion of the hour of labor, any labor, because it satisfies human needs, is what we are using as unit of account. And what do we use as so-called means of payments? Is the trust that I will get something similar at some point from someone else. So when I'm thinking of a mainstream theory of economics, is the ones that don't tell me what money is, what does it look like? As I said, is it beans, coffee beans as have been used, etc. We are running out of time. Yes, Maria, I will finish, I will wrap up. And I would also consider mainstream the consideration that this one thing have to perform these three fundamental functions, and which is not relevant to everybody in the world, definitely not. So my one suggestion for me is, well, we need to start breaking up these three functions, because for the majority of people around the world, these three functions do not serve the purpose of what they need as money. Well, thank you. Oh, just one little thing. If you are looking for new frameworks to understand economic activity, I would suggest Polanyi. But that's just because it's my favorite, much more open framework of production, distribution, and consumption. So thanks.
Okay, thank you, Georgina. I'm sorry for cutting you short. I would like to ask for one final, very short comment from the other panelists on what would you suggest that people do to decolonize, de-westernize, democratize economics. A lot of people have asked about this, and also whether you think this can be done only in countries that don't really have an advanced capitalist system, or if it's viable for countries like Norway or Japan as well. Thank you.
I can quickly go, and then I'll leave it to my economist friends to answer. I think the thing that we can do is fight from where you are. In any community that we're in, wherever there's capitalism is present, white supremacy, patriarchy is present, oppression is present. So go outside, talk to your neighbors. Do they have what they need? Does the person that you walk by every day have food? If they don't, what do you need to do to make sure that they do have food? What do you need to do to make sure that people have access to water? So it's really simple actions that then build movements. Yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Thank you, Luam. Does Ferda maybe want to go, because I saw her unmute herself before? You're still muted, Ferda. Okay,
Do you hear me?
You can go, yes.
Okay, great. Well, I totally agree with Luam. We have to organize. We have to organize academics within academia and to create cooperation among us and start poisoning our students, fresh students' minds with outdated and non-useful theories. But what I mean by is that, yes, we have to teach some stuff. But what we can do is we can always criticize at the end what you're teaching and you know, create question marks on top of students' minds. And also we have to create classes, programs, all sorts of alternative economic theories, theory classes, and start disseminating this knowledge within academia. And outside academia, we again need to organize and we need to get contact with groups, peoples, all sort of resistance activities, and try to create connections between ordinary people and academia in order to do what you know, what we are trying to do for the time being. Well, it's a difficult question, but we will find our way as we move forward. Thank you.
Well, what to do to decolonize? The first thing is we have to end this story with capitalism. In case we have capitalism, we have colonization, whether it is neo-colonialism or old style colonialism. So we cannot have a decolonizing or decolonized economy if we still have capitalism. One thing is this. The second thing is the question about how to incorporate local knowledge into economics. We have to be ready to talk about difficult topics. What I've learned, especially studying with Ferda, researching folk cultures, is that the folk and part of the folk, and coming from peasant families, they are ready to discuss any topic, no matter how difficult it is. So in case we have had colonization of various types, full of violence and genocide and patriarchy, we see folk cultures discussing this violence, discussing who is taking what from the environment, and discussing what to do. So justice, for example, is something that we don't talk about. We're not going to decolonize anything. We're just going to fool ourselves. So this is my take about decolonization.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We are very much out of time. We're really sorry we didn't have enough time to answer all the questions. We've got a group on our Rethinking Economics Facebook page that you can connect, where you can connect with other attendees, and we would like to ask you to fill out a survey that you can find in the chat. It's about economies, their role, and how they respond to crisis. And we would like to invite you to the rest of our stream sessions. So tomorrow we've got a feminist economics workshop, and on Friday we've got a plenary on what decolonizing economics means, and we can continue these discussions there. So thank you all and have a great rest of the festival.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.